It's going to become a massive problem in the next 10 to 20 years unless we begin preventing dementia. It's not going to come from curing it. I feel really confident about that. It's going to come from preventing it. If we could get rid of or avoid even 40% of the cases of future dementias, it would be a manageable problem on a societal basis.
How do we face the daunting challenges of dementia and cognitive decline, both as individuals and as families deeply affected by these conditions? Today on Seek, Go, Create the Leadership Journey, we have a deeply personal and enlightening conversation lined up with Dr. Mitchell Clionsky, a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist. As someone who has witnessed the impact of dementia within my own family, losing my father to this illness 18 months ago, along with its presence with both of his parents and most of his siblings, I am particularly eager to gather his insights. With over 45 years of experience and more than 30,000 patients treated, Dr. Clionsky has co-authored Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain with his wife, Dr. Emily Clionsky. Dr. Mitchell, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Thank you for giving me a chance to meet you and your audience, Tim. I'm really excited.
I am excited that you're here too. And this is personal for me. Let me just go ahead and say as we get started here, but let me start with one of my icebreaker questions, and then we'll just go ahead and dive into the deep end. I think you gave me permission to call you Mitch earlier, so I'm going to call you Mitch if that's okay. But I want everyone to know he is Dr. Mitchell Clionsky. All right. So Mitch, let's just say we're out and about somewhere and not at a medical conference or anything like that. And you bump into someone and you get chit-chatting and someone asks you what you do. What do you tell people?
I tell people that I measure how they think. And that usually stops them. And they look at me and say, really? I said, yeah. What I do as a neuropsychologist is we give people a variety of different kinds of tests and measures that look at how well you pay attention in different ways, how well you're able to process new information. We give tests of short-term memory. That's oftentimes the biggest question that people come in with, at least. We also do tests of what are called executive functions. So planning, judgment, the ability to think in larger ways and to take things and adapt them to new circumstances. We do measures of intelligence. We touch on personality and depression and anxiety. And then we take all those scores and compare those scores with what we would expect for someone like them, someone with their background, education, their occupational level, their age, and even their background reading level. We have a test that we can give them that helps us to nail what they should be able to do. And then we take their real scores, compare them against their theoretical scores, and we see if everything lines up the way it should. And if it does, we reassure them. Things look good. You don't have to worry right now. Here's some things you can do to increase your chances of avoiding dementia as you get older, because I'm all about prevention. That's really what this is about. And if they're not lining up, we can use that same information to help discover what's going on that's causing those problems and what can be done to either stop them from getting worse or potentially improve them. And that's what really gets exciting. We can say, here's some ways that you can get better. So that's the nutshell of what I tell people.
Yeah, and there's a lot to that. When someone starts off with, we help people with the way they think. This being more of a longer form interview podcast, I think people listening in would be, they consider themselves maybe deeper thinkers and the way we dive into topics and all that. So I think that's fascinating on so many levels, and we're going to have a great conversation. And as I said when we started, this isn't generic for me. This is quite personal. And I was actually texting with my sister. I'll just go ahead and hit this right out of the gate, and we'll go ahead and address it because I think it might lead and guide us. In December of 22, our father passed away. He was 84 at the time, and at the age of 80-ish, he was diagnosed with dementia. It was about March of 2020. That'll give you a point of when that occurred. Now, we have gone back, and I've gone through some conversations that I've had with him, and we were recognizing some cognitive decline years before that. So that's one thing that's going on, and it obviously impacts I have a sibling, my sister, and it's something that we discuss quite a bit. I'm 60. I think she's 55. I hope I got that right. She's 5 years younger than me. And so we're looking at that. Both my father's parents, his dad passed away with Parkinson's. His mother had Alzheimer's, dementia, and he has 5 siblings, and 3 of them have some degree of Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, whatever. They're all in their late 70s, 80s, but still. I would probably be lying if I didn't say it's something that is a consideration of ours. So my first big question would be, how concerned should my sister and I be that we are now dealing with some type of genetic situation with cognitive decline?
Well, you've told me a couple important things. Number one, there's a high loading, at least on one side of your family, possibly both, in terms of risk for neurodegenerative diseases, brain diseases, as you age. But they're also somewhat diverse. There's Parkinson's disease, there's Alzheimer's disease, which is really different in terms of its underlying cause as we currently conceptualize it. There's probably some vascular dementia factors because those are really common. I wouldn't be surprised if those are in there as well. And you have a good reason to be concerned, but not panicked. And the reason is that even in the most genetically predetermined ways, unless it's very early onset, we're talking about people in their 50s who are developing dementia, the actual genetic contribution is probably about 5%. Now, you'd rather not have that. You'd rather have them say, well, we did some genetic testing. You're in the protected range and you can be less concerned. But even there, you couldn't be, because those are only genetic risks for Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't protect you against Parkinson's. It doesn't protect you against dementias due to repeated head injuries, alcohol abuse, or vascular factors. So while you might say, wow, that's all great from my brain's perspective, if you've also got a strong family history of diabetes or high blood pressure or untreated sleep apnea, you may have other risks. The important thing to understand is it's like golf, the game of golf. You play it where it lays. Sometimes you're lucky and you're on the fairway. Sometimes you're in the rough. You don't want to be in the woods if you can avoid it. And you definitely don't want to be in the water hazard. But you got to play it where it lays. So the real issue from my perspective, because I hear this question all the time, it's a legit question, but we can't undo our genetic contribution. And we know that even for people with very strong genetic contributions, lifestyle, health factors, approaches to this can make a big difference in their ultimate outcome. So I would reassure you that, well, that's not the best news. It's not damning news either. It just means that you're going to also want to pay really close attention to what you do.
So this brought up something that was fascinating, especially with you saying that you actually study how people think. I read a book not long ago called The Art of Thinking Clearly, and I recognize that many times we have dogmas, mindsets, etc., that are as damaging as often some of the physical aspects. So here's the question I've got for you. Are we asking the wrong question? If you were to talk to my sister and I, what questions should we be asking? Let's make this personal. And then I've got some bigger questions I want to ask.
Okay. We know that there are significant numbers of factors that will reduce your risk of dementia by 50% or more. Now, this is not my data. This is much better data than I could ever accumulate. back in 2017, there was a very large commission in Great Britain called the Lancet Commission. It was commissioned by the Lancet, which is their version of the New England Journal of Medicine. And they put together a blue ribbon panel of experts, about 27 of them, including a couple from the United States. And they looked at all of the various factors that had proven evidence of reducing your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementias, dementias due to Parkinson's. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of things under the category of dementia, not just Alzheimer's. And what they discovered was that they had 9 factors that would reduce the risk by 40%. Wow, that's pretty impressive. 3 years later, in 2020, they published a follow-up because they found 3 more factors, including hearing loss, which they didn't really know about 3 years before. And they said, this bumps it up a little bit. Now we're looking at probably about 42% or so. A couple years after that, here in the United States, a similar group took data from the United States Health and Retirement Survey, applied the Lancet Commission 12 factors, and they discovered that we could reduce the risk by 60%. So now you got 40% on one end, 60% on the other. I like round numbers because they're more rememberable. So I say 1 out of 2. But it doesn't stop there, because when we wrote the book on dementia prevention, using your head to save your brain, we then realized there were more factors. We've got 20 factors, including the 12 from the Lancet Commission, but adding 8 more that they did not cover. And we found these factors not by just making them up, we being my wife, an internal medicine doctor and psychiatrist who specializes in treating brain diseases. Her name is Emily Clionsky. And one of her strengths, one of her superpowers, is her ability to take information and synthesize it from a variety of different sources. And one of the things about dementia, it's really fascinating, is that it's impacted by a variety of different medical conditions and therefore falls into different medical professions. So it involves just not neurology and psychiatry and neuropsychology. It also involves cardiology, because a lot of what is involved with our heart also impacts our brain. It involves endocrinology, so people with diabetes. That's also a huge risk factor for dementia. It involves pulmonology, breathing, and sleep medicine, specifically obstructive sleep apnea. So you have to read that literature. Then you have to look over into areas like exercise physiology, genetics. You have to look at a variety of different behavioral types of involvements. You have to look at some of the details dealing with chemistry of medications that we're taking and things that we're buying over the counter. So our goal was to cast this really broad net, to read all of this information, because the experts in each of these areas are not reading all of that. They're reading what they're reading. It's like being in this certain, they know more and more about a very specific area, which is wonderful if you have that particular problem. But there aren't any dementiologists. Think about that. There's no particular field for dementia, despite the fact that this is an incredibly important problem with huge societal costs and personal grievance as a result of this illness. And yet there isn't a field of dementiology. I want to coin that term. So here it is. I'm going to put it out because I'm going to probably go and get a trademark on it. Dementia, dementiology, and dementiologists. We need specialists who look at all of this. But the important thing was that we came up with all these factors. We then made sure that they had high levels of scientific certainty. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of clickbait out there. I'm sure you see it all the time. Eat this, don't eat that, do this, don't do that, and this one thing or these 2 things are going to fix your dementia. It's nonsense. It doesn't work that way. And you really can't eat your way into dementia prevention either. So we got a lot of people talking a lot of gibberish out there. We wanted to get rid of the fads, get rid of all the hyperbole, and focus on things that actually had solid evidence. So we put together a model that had 20 factors that show how they're all related. And then our goal was to translate the information that's hard science into the communication like you're sitting, like we're talking right now. Here's what this is about. This is what it means. Here's what this is about. Here's how you go about finding it out. And that was the whole idea about this project, was to take this information, pull it together, and translate it so people could use it, because it doesn't do any good if you don't understand it and can't use it. That's where we came about this whole project. But it's great because we now know that this is a preventable illness for at least half of the people who are worried. The question is, you, your sister, other people out there, what are your risk factors? What's your individual profile? And that's where you go up to our website. You can take a free dementia prevention checklist, which asks you 25 questions, and it gives you where you're on target, where you're off target, and where you're near target. Just need a little nudge. Just need to lower your blood pressure a little bit, or just need to reduce your hemoglobin A1C and go from being pre-diabetic to not being diabetic. So those are the things I would encourage you and your sister and other people to do. Is it's out there. You can find out not right this moment, but in the next hour, what your dementia risk is, simply by filling out a questionnaire and discovering along the way, I actually don't know the answer to that. Well, the answer to that, I got to figure that out. Got to talk to my doctor about running that. That's where I'd encourage you to go, because then you're really working with not just information, but the beginnings of a plan. And that's
Right.
what we want to do.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed about us as we went on this journey with my father, and I think it's also an issue culturally, is that people are looking for a quick answer. What caused it with Dad, with his family? They lived near a Kermagee chemical plant, or they all drank the same water, or we're looking for quick answers. Number one, if we're in a situation. And then I also think we're looking for quick fixes when it comes to prevention. Now, one of the things, I don't have it pulled up on my screen right here, but I've got it pulled up behind this window, is within your book, that diagram that you mentioned with all of those 20, and I showed it to my wife last night while I was reading this in bed. I said, take a look at this diagram here. And you talked about how there's an interconnectivity between all of these. It's not as if take this pill and everything will be better. And I observed this quite a bit, not to get controversial. Back with COVID, there was this thought, if we have a vaccine, then it'll solve all this and the world will be greater. And it wasn't quite that simple. Factors involved with that were obesity and general health and all those things like that. I'll pose this as a question. I'm making that statement, but it appears as if even myself, if I'm aware of it, I'm looking for simple answers. And I'm an engineer by training. I know this is complex, but it seems like culturally, we're not looking for those 20 factors with that diagram that you and your wife laid out. How can we address that in our culture that is looking for the quick fixes?
You're right. And most of the quick fixes usually involve diet. One of the things that just gets me is I look at where are the top selling books on dementia prevention, and most of them are diet books. And we know that while eating things like a Mediterranean diet that's got a lot of legumes and green leafy vegetables and not a lot of beef and more fish and chicken and lean protein and vegetable based, all that stuff is probably, from a prevention perspective, the best diet that you could eat. Doesn't account for much of the data, much of the variance in terms of prediction. And the other thing is, it's not really demonstrably better than the next best normal diet. It is clearly better than a horrible diet. a horrible diet filled with lots of fast food and ultra processed things. The Mediterranean diet is clearly better, but it's not better than just a good, solid, varied diet. But people like to buy cookbooks because they think, I don't have to worry about this now because I'm eating healthy. And people look at me all the time and tell me that, but I eat so healthy. How can I be at risk? And I say, that's great that you eat healthy. I encourage you to do that. But you're not exercising. You're drinking more alcohol than is healthy. You're taking an over-the-counter sleep aid because you can't fall asleep for a variety of reasons. All of those things you have to factor in as well. And, what about the fact that you're overweight and that's putting more stress on your blood pressure? So they don't necessarily the complexity. But I guess the one saving grace, and we talked about it in the book, that it's sort of like an intertwined ball of knots. And you can't just cut it through the middle. You can't just clear out the knot with one stroke. But the cool thing is if you start pulling on some of the threads, some of the strings, what you find is that makes the other ones easier to approach. Let's take the case of exercise. I have a formula for getting people to exercise, which I'll share right now. I call it the 10x3 formula. You take a 10-minute brisk walk 3 times a day. And here's why it works. It's not the optimal. I mean, you see this stuff all the time on the internet. What to do to get this great body if you're 50 and 60. And people say, should I exercise for this or exercise for that? Those are all people who are at the high end of exercising. Those are not the people I see. I see the people where I ask them, what do you do for exercise? And they avert their eyes because they don't want to tell me. Or they tell me things like, I have an exercise bicycle. And I said, that doesn't tell me anything. Are you on the exercise bicycle? How long? How often? So we're looking for people who are more often not doing enough regularly. So the reason that the 10x3 formula works is, number one, it's hard to talk yourself out of. It's only 10 minutes. So you're never too busy. You're never too bored to do 10 minutes of exercise. You never need special equipment. You don't have to wait for this machine to come in. You don't have to be in a class. You don't have to join a gym. For most people, it's available around where they live or where they can get to pretty easily. And it adds up. So the 10 minutes 3 times a day is 30 minutes a day. That's 210 minutes a week. So what are the major medical societies saying? 150 to 300 minutes a week is going to reduce your risk of dementia, your risk of dying too young, your risk of cardiovascular disease. They all come together at that. 150 to 300. Great. 2 tens in the middle. Second thing is if you're moving fast enough. We talk about brisk. What is brisk? Brisk walking is walking fast enough that your heart rate increases, but not so fast that you can't talk while you're walking. So it's a great conversational thing, a social thing to do as well. If you could do that, you're going to walk about 9-10 miles a week. That's pretty cool. And you're going to be able to do it even if it's hot and even if it's cold. And I tell people, don't go out if it's icy. Find something else to do because I don't want you slipping and falling. But you can do this. And then you can decide once you're doing that consistently, is that enough for me now? Because it might not be. You might say, I can up my game here. I know that I can't over-exercise in this sense. Sure, you can go out and try to run a marathon. I'm not suggesting people do that. But they can go from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. They can go from that up to an hour a day. And that's going to give them about 10,000 steps a day. And that's really optimal in terms of the dementia prevention literature and how it translates.
So one thing that I noticed as I was reading through that, and I think that's great info. I was just thinking as you were talking, I said, yeah, I went out yesterday and I played 90 minutes of pickleball and I measured my heart rate. I got it up to about 150. Sometimes pickleball you don't do, But I've actually gotten to where I love just going out on a long walk. And to me, that's as much of a mental exercise as it is for physical. But one of the things, and I hate to, this is going to extremely sound like I'm oversimplifying, which is what I discussed earlier. But almost everything that I read in your book, I don't say common sense. That's not the right word because common sense isn't super common, but it's just healthy habits. It's just like good health. If we were talking about, you discuss a lot about sleep. I do want to address that in a little while. We'll talk more about sleep and different things like that. But just if you got diabetes, if you're obese, if you're overweight, if you're trying to, isn't this stuff what we should be doing anyway?
Yes. You know, we talk at the beginning of the book about how books like this typically make a promise. And the promise we make is if you do these things, you will be healthier. We can't promise that this will prevent you from getting dementia because there are just cases that exist that no matter what you do, I've got patients like this. And man, does it frustrate me because most of the time I'm thinking that the things I do are going to really make a difference in my patients' lives. And I see some of these people and they've got especially Alzheimer's type dementia, and they're on current medications, which for most people slow down the decline. In many cases, stop it from progressing for some years. And we've had these pills out for 20, 25 years. And I know that when they get on them, that's going to be good. And they've got good habits and they exercise and they don't drink too much and they don't have major medical problems. They still get worse. And that's just the way life is, unfortunately. And we all know people who never smoked get lung cancer. We know people who get cirrhosis of the liver, never had a drop of alcohol in their life. Just life. But you're right about the fact that these have a lot to do. Turns out that a lot of the things our mothers taught us years ago really were good. We just thought we could work around them and we didn't. And because our behavior and our health are separated in time. And this is a really important concept because I was talking about this with one of my patients this morning. I said, if every time you ate something which you really shouldn't eat, you gained a pound, you would quickly get in control of it. Nobody would ever be too heavy or too light if the result was immediate. The same way you're not going to leave your hand on a hot stove because it's an immediate feedback. The problem with most health behaviors is it seems like there's no consequence. You smoke cigarettes in your 20s. Chances are you're not going to experience much in the way, except perhaps financial problems because of your cigarette habit, and people don't want to get close to you because you smell like smoke. But if you hang out with other people who smoke, they're not even going to bother with that. It's only when you get to be in your 50s and 60s and 70s that the chickens come home to roost, that those problems, those things that you started and continue to do, end up being a problem. So that's why those health habits are really important, both to reinforce, but also to show the data why it happens. And then most importantly, I think, help people to then figure out how to make that change. Nobody argues with me if I say exercise is good. And gimme. Sure, I know that. Nobody who is significantly overweight argues that's not a problem. They all know it is. They can rationalize it and say, you're just shaming me because, no, I'm not. I'm just telling you your body was built for a certain size. That's where it works efficiently. If you're making it carry around a lot more and do a lot more work, it's going to break on you. It's pretty simple. Same way if you loaded your car up with bricks and tried to drive it long distances, it's going to break down faster than the car that is lighter. It's just the way physics works. So you can do that, and that's your choice. But it's not going to work out for you very well in the long run. So a lot of those things, it's not that people don't know, it's that they don't know how to do it. And that's why the last part of the book is all about using what I learned as a psychologist and a therapist very early in my career to help people to recognize areas of change, to figure out how to rethink those problems and then implement them. Because we see people all the time, they try to analyze why they do this thing that's a problem. I don't like that very much. I get bored with that. We can, sit around all day wondering why you're doing the things you shouldn't do. I'd really rather put our effort into helping you to do the things you should do. That's going to get you somewhere.
So the interesting thing about that is I was reading through that section of the book. It was basically what I do with leaders and leadership teams. Establish the problem, develop a plan, and then you stick to the strategic plan and move forward to have some degree of impact. Do you adjust and tweak along the way? I like the golf analogy you use, play it where it lays, that type thing. That's really good. Well, another great thing I really liked in the book, I think there's terminologies that people struggle with, like they call everything Alzheimer's when it's I learned that early on, is there's dementia, and then there's the categories that are underneath that. There's cognitive issues, things like that. But one of the things I wanted to ask about here is you gave it was a short history of Alzheimer's and dementia. And I think we're at a little over 100 years ago is when it started coming into our vocabulary. And then you mentioned, I think in the 70s or 80s, there was a wealthy businessman that his wife was suffering some things, and it really came more into the forefront. And I know this is you and your wife, it's your life, but as society, as culture, are we getting better? Is this getting worse? Is it epidemic proportions? When you've just gone through what we've done the last 3, 4, 5 years, it seems as if it's everywhere. You look around and you've got where you see it all over the place. And so in your mind, you go, this is everywhere. But what does the data tell us, and how are we doing as a society with this?
The data tells us it's increasing. And the reason it's increasing is not that dementia has become more virulent. It's that we're getting older as a society. So I'm a baby boomer. And because of that, I've been in this wonderful bump in the population that has fueled most of the big changes in society. It's our rock and roll music that you're still hearing on so many of the commercials on TV. We're fueling the pickleball revolution because a lot of people my age can't run to play tennis anymore. There's this whole bump in population that's now 65 and older. And we know that the risk of dementia increases proportionately as we get older. If you're in your mid-60s, you have about a 10% chance of having dementia. You get to your mid-70s, it doubles. It's now about 20%. You make it to your mid-80s, it's now about 40%. Now, it levels off after that, largely due to the fact that other things are killing people, so the healthiest people are now surviving. And so you don't really get that 60% in your 90s kind of thing. There's a lot of people who, once they make it there, don't succumb to dementia. Until the very, very end of their lives. I hear this all the time. Yeah, my dad lived to be 92. He was demented for the last 2 months. That wasn't really dementia. That was just a breakdown in his systems at that point, showed up in terms of his confusion. But it's this growing older population that's causing a whole balance change. It used to be that there were enough new people, enough young people earning money that those who put in their money to the Social Security system were pretty sure there was enough new money coming in to pay for them in retirement. Plus, they didn't live that long into retirement. You retired maybe at 65, and a lot of you would be dead by your early to mid-70s. Not so much anymore. Fewer people putting money in, more people living longer. It's the same way with caretaking and dementia. And so we're seeing this increase that is going to be a real problem. It's not that it isn't a real problem now. It's going to become a massive problem in the next 10 to 20 years unless we begin preventing dementia. It's not going to come from curing it. I feel really confident about that. It's going to come from preventing it. If we could get rid of or avoid even 40% of the cases of future dementias. It would be a manageable problem on a societal basis. It wouldn't be manageable anymore from an individual basis. You still got your families. And by the way, I'm in the same club as you. My mom had dementia. I've sat in that seat. I understand that. I tell my patients, which most of the time really helps, because I tell them this is something where no matter how much knowledge you have, no matter what you're doing for your job, that is a very powerless feeling to see your parent change from who they were when they raised you to who they became when they developed dementia. And it's a shakes you to your core, as you well know. So again, it's aging and we got to do something now. That's going to show up 5 years later, 10 years later. That's going to make a difference.
And I think another reason for the call to action, and this is a topic that was very challenging for us as we were going through it. My sister and my mother attempted to be a caretaker for a while, but until it got to where she couldn't. And then my sister and her family were caretakers for a while. And then we had to look at facilities. And we had some means, so we were able to look at some facilities that were not the low end or anything like that. Definitely probably not the highest end, but they would have been respectable facilities, Atlanta metro area. I do not think we are equipped to take care of the current population that's dealing with these cognitive issues. And I definitely know that we're not prepared to do it if the numbers grow as aging. Do you want to say anything about that or have a comment about that without getting way off into the weeds on the care issue related to it?
I think you're right. I do know that caregiving from an other than family perspective is different depending on where you are in this country. California has some interesting models for people who basically have a home and take care of elderly people with dementia that they bring into the home. I know that in Europe, there are some other models. I don't think we have the best model in terms of assisted living or continuity of care kinds of communities. I think it's, for many people, a godsend beyond family care. When my mother developed dementia, it was pretty clear, both my brother and I, because we're the only siblings, that neither of us were prepared, given where we were with our lives and our careers, to have our mother live with either of us. And she knew that as well. She didn't want to do that. We just all decided, she had enough with it at that point. We decided that one of us would kill the other person at some point. So that seemed to be a bad idea. And I wanted to remain as her son. I didn't want to be her caregiver. I wanted to be able to go over to the assisted living place close by to where I lived and take her out, take her to my house for dinner, for family gatherings, take her out for drives, take her to the restaurant, take her places on trips, do things that were really positive, but didn't require me to have to worry about, was she up in the middle of the night and did I have to bathe her or anything like that? So I think and for some families, that's not a problem for them. They approach it very differently. They want mom or dad to live with them. They want to provide all that care. That's wonderful. There's different ways of going about this. But I think that getting back to your original point, we're really going to stress the fabric of society if we continue to have more and more people getting older and getting demented with the current resources. Because it's not just you, it's also the people you have to hire to be able to provide the care. Where does that come from?
Yeah, and almost every facility we interact with was short-staffed, constant churn, very difficult to keep people around. And I felt for them, being a business guy, leadership guy, I kept looking at it going, this business model is just unsustainable as far as employees. And a lot of this was tail end of COVID. I could just see that it could be an extreme strain and that we're probably not equipped to handle it.
We're also not looking at it, I don't think, as well as we should. Everyone's still pouring money into pharmaceuticals. And that's where a lot of the It's driven by the finances. It's driven by stock prices. It's driven by a lot of things which are at a distance from actual care for this condition, this disease. It's not like other diseases. There's people who have other diseases who still live at home and go about their lives and still work in many cases. This is a disease that robs that person of their ability to take care of themselves and live their own lives. They require care. And no matter what, unless we find something, I hope that we're going to see something maybe in genetic or recoding like CRISPR technology, or perhaps something that is in fact a prevention through an inoculation. But we're not there yet, and we're some distance away. Right now, we really have to work on the other parts of this.
Right. One of the things I'd love to do here, I'm trying to watch my time because I know that I could probably talk to you for hours about this. I would love to hit what I would consider to be rapid fire topics and just have you comment. And I know that there may be a lot of data and things behind all this, but I'd love to hit as many of these as I can. And some of them are covered in the book. And then one of the things we're going to hit really hard as we wrap up is for people to go and do, I think y'all call it the test, and drive them to your site. Or is that what they do face to face with you guys, or is that on the site?
Okay, so the most is not deployable at this point. It
Okay.
was only for physicians, and it's not currently available. We're going to be rolling it out again as an early test that doctors can use, and possibly a version of it that you can give for mom or dad in your home. But that's at least till the end of, this is the summer of the most for me. Last year was the summer for first talking about this book and things. This summer, we're going to get that up and running again, so it's out there. But the prevention checklist is where I'm really hoping people are going to pay attention, because that's going to, really give them the armamentarium to go after this problem.
Very good. We'll hit that again at the end and remind people where they can go. So there's one thing that's been extremely in my forefront for some time now, and that is my sleep health. My wife makes fun of me. I've got this Apple Watch, and I've got this app that tells me my blood oxygen level and how many hours of deep sleep and all this type stuff. I also notice, this is interesting for people that travel like we do in RVs, altitude impacts it. And whether I'm in the desert or higher humidity, we're in the Black Hills of South Dakota now. So I know you cover it extensively in the book, but say a few things about how important sleep is.
So great question. There's sleep, which has to do with continuity, which has to do with the amount of sleep that you're getting. You can get too little sleep. That's a problem. 5 hours or less is not enough sleep. 9 hours or more is too much sleep. You want to be in that 6 to 8, 9-hour range. Continuity is important, not only because it's important to go through the different sleep stages, but your awakening during the night may be due to other problems that we're also got to look at. And the third part is the consistency of when you sleep can be real important. There's a real nice study that looked at that, and they found that if people went to bed and got up at all kinds of different hours, that oftentimes that increased their risk, whereas you don't have to be rigid about it. But having generally, this is the time I go to sleep and this is the time I wake up, can be a real advantage for you. Now, the issue about why is sleep better at different places may have to do with the amount of oxygen, because when you're up in the mountains, you may be a mile high and your oxygen saturation is lowering. And so while you're waking up is because you're not breathing while you're sleeping. You're waking up because you're gasping for air. You can see the same phenomenon when you fly transatlantic or transpacific. They have the atmospheres set at about 8,000 feet, back where all of the people, the passengers are. They have it set at a lower level up in the cockpit. Why is that? It's okay if you fall asleep because you're not getting enough oxygen. You don't want the pilot to fall asleep. So one time Emily and I flew to Europe, and she brought along little pulse oximeters, like you see in the doctor's offices. These were her pulse oximeters. And we put them on people's fingers sitting next to us in the plane and watched their oxygen saturation decline. Then we gave it to the flight attendants, and they were incredibly amazed at how their oxygen levels went down. Now, the transatlantic, transpacific flights are the plum flights. So they're the ones that the older flight attendants get. So they're taking these long flights at the highest altitude, and they're also more likely to have a problem with that drop in oxygen. So there's a lot there between sleep and oxygen.
So the oxygen question, are we suffocating our brains? Are some of us suffocating our brains because we're not getting enough oxygen? Real quick, I wasn't really aware of the blood oxygen issue until COVID, because when I first got COVID, someone said, you just need to keep an eye on your blood oxygen level. So we got one of those finger pulsometers, and I would watch it. I think it got down to 88, which I was like going, okay, I need to watch this. But my watch is supposedly measuring my blood oxygen. Like last night, I was at 94%. I don't sleep well if it gets much lower than that. And also, are we suffocating our brains to some extent?
The issue is something called obstructive sleep apnea, OSA. Obstructive sleep apnea is a condition whereby while we're sleeping, we either stop breathing or our oxygen level drops by 4%, a total of or average of 5 times or more per hour. So you find this out by taking a home sleep study usually, which is painless and easy to do, and you can do it in your own bed. And it's going to tell you over the course of the night, how many times did you stop breathing for 10 seconds? And how many times did your oxygen level drop by 4%? And then you average that with the number of hours that you slept. If it's 5 or more, you've got sleep apnea. Now, how common is that? There's some really cool data that's come out since we published the book. It was just about 4 months ago. This is data that came out on normal people, 6,000, quote, normal people. I put that was always in quotes because none of us is really normal. But people from the general population, people go into studies that look at how people are doing over the course of years. Framingham Heart Study is one of these studies. The Mayo Clinic does different studies, a bunch of different places. These preventive health places all decided to band together and give everyone in their 6,000 new cohort an overnight sleep study, people 58 and older. Half of them had sleep apnea. Most of them had no clue that they had sleep apnea. And yet, if you're not getting enough air down your lungs, you're not getting enough oxygen pulled out of the air. Oxygen is only 20% of our air. The rest of it's nitrogen, some other things. So you're not getting enough oxygen pulled out. The oxygen molecules then can't hook onto the red blood cells and make their way up to our brains. And that's the problem. Not enough air, not enough oxygen. Our brains don't work properly. We don't think well. While we're sleeping, our brains cannot clear out the toxins that accumulate while we're thinking during the day. There's a system, another thing only discovered in the past couple of years, called the glymphatic system that flushes out the byproducts. I tell people it's like the night cleaning crew comes in, empties my trash can, cleans off my desk. Our brains have a system like that. It doesn't work in a low oxygen environment. So toxins build up. We don't think well. It's a whole variety of other things, but we tend to be tired during the day, oftentimes grumpy. We could fall asleep at times we don't want to, occasionally even while driving a car. And watching TV, if you're that person, waking up like this because you're watching it while you're sitting down and you're dozing off. So there's a lot of reasons why we need to pay attention to that.
So there's something related to that I've had a theory on. I don't know exactly how to prove this with people that I work with. And typically they're entrepreneurs, leaders, CEOs, things like that. And it's related to what you just said, but maybe it's a cousin of it. And that is this thing of capacity or the amount of stress and what we could handle within our brain. And with your study, this may be related to the dementia thing. It may be related to cognitive. But one thing I've observed is if I'm working with a leader and they are under a lot of what we would call stress, there's a lot going on, a lot coming at them. I recognize that they're oftentimes less creative. Decision making sometimes is a little bit, I hate to use the word impaired, but it's not as healthy as it should be. And so I didn't see a lot of it in the book. I may have missed it, but like just stress. One of the things we know, if we go back 30 years, you and I are old enough to remember this, we had a few hundred stimuli coming at us on a daily basis. Now we've got thousands of stuff coming at us. So just capacity wise, does that feed into this? Can we just use up our brain and all of a sudden it starts shutting down on us, or overstress it, or have too much going on? Just take whatever you want to from that rant and go with it.
Yeah, we didn't cover this very much in the book because our goal was dementia prevention. And so what you're asking, I think, is a question of bandwidth. How many things can we do at once and divide our resources? Like setting up your Wi-Fi in your house, and you have a certain number of nodes to your Wi-Fi, and you have to divide how much gets what. And the more you add, and the more people you have sitting in the other room, downloading movies or playing games or listening to music or being on a Zoom call, that depletes it. Same way with your brain. They say, can you walk, chew gum at the same time? Actually, it turns out that one of the ways we should be testing for dementia, and I've not done this research yet, but I know what it's based on, is we should have cognitive tests that we give when someone's sitting and then while they're walking briskly, because at that point, they have to divide their resources to be able to handle the balance and avoidance of things in their way, obstacles. And we know that their oxygen level also declines as they're walking for most people, unless you're, really in great shape. And then we would see the difference, the decline in their capacity to process information, whether it's things like counting backwards, reciting the months of the year backwards. I thought of all kinds of different tests we might give them. I don't right now have the capacity, the bandwidth to do this study, but boy, I would love someone to do it, because I think the contrast between how you think while you're sitting and how you think when you're under stress would be a really important marker for what your abilities are going to be going forward. Years ago, I used to do a lot of work in stress management. Way in the early part of my career, back in the 70s, I used to do stress management for executives, actually. I used to do workshops for them on communication, assertiveness training, and stress management. There was always this dynamic between how much stress and how much coping does the person have. Because if you have no stress, but a lot of coping capacity, that's not good. That's what I see in people who retire and don't have a plan for retirement. They're bored, they're unhappy, they don't know what's going on. Then you have the opposite, where they've got a ton of stress and not much coping ability. And those people are breaking down emotionally and physically because they're just juggling too many balls. And where you really want this is somewhere in the middle, where you have enough stress that it keeps life interesting and challenging and growth producing, but enough coping ability that you revel in that you like to do that you grow from it, as opposed to being overwhelmed by it. So it's really the great balancing act in this.
One of the things that I speak about when I do coaching is and if I'm wrong on this, please correct me, as I say, sometimes we've got almost like a pressure cooker going on here within our brain. And that one of the things we need to do is identify the people that know the old pressure cooker. It starts making the noises. We need to find ways to relieve that pressure. And what you brought up was fascinating. Just a walk. I would notice when I would swim or even pickleball, it's just a clearing. It's like an eraser. It erases some things that are hanging out there. None of the things are any different when I come back to them, but it just releases some of that pressure so that I can look at it with a fresher look. I think I've got a deep spiritual thought. I think oftentimes prayer for those that meditate, different things. Just quiet time, just being still and quiet is something that I really promote with a lot of my clients. Just find some space to where you can clear the decks is a good thing. So I appreciate all that feedback and input. All right, the next kind of bigger topic you mentioned in the book, and I'll let people go check this out, hearing impairment, and you even used some visual impairment. And we do believe that my father had some hearing issues that he was not wanting to get diagnosed, didn't want, and here's the reason why. This is one reason I'm bringing this up. He had a ringing in his ears, the tinnitus or tinnitus, whatever it's called. I actually have some degree of that. I've spoken to a number of people my age. I think that might be more common than uncommon. I don't know. I've done a little bit of research on it, but he didn't want to have his hearing tested and to have anything that would magnify it because he thought it would just increase that noise of the ringing. It's obviously not a ringing in the ears. It's something internal. So I guess if you want to say anything about hearing, even though it's covered in the book, but specifically the tinnitus or the tinnitus, however it's pronounced, any thoughts or comments or data on that as it relates to this topic?
Tinnitus is really common, and it can be from a number of sources, both injuries, some people after auto accidents, some people through exposure to loud noises, some people who we don't even know why, they just develop this, quote, ringing in the ears. But it's usually at a certain decibel level or a shushing kind of sound or something that can be really distracting. But it's worse when there's no background noise. People experience it as they're falling asleep. A lot of folks find that having white noise in the background or a TV in the other room or something like that is actually better than having no noise at all. There's some work that is done with hearing aids. Paradoxically, they're able to actually improve the tinnitus by the hearing aids, but a lot of times it just doesn't make a difference. It's a shame that your dad was at a point, and I see this all the time, where people decide what it's going to be before they ever try it out, which I try to talk them out of because it keeps them stuck where they are. But the worst that could happen is you get your hearing tested if you have a hearing loss. These days, hearing aids are remarkably cheaper than they used to be. They're remarkably smaller than they used to be. Oftentimes, unless you're really staring in someone's ear, you can't even tell they're wearing a hearing aid. Because it used to be that people would say to me, "Oh, I want to do that. It's going to make," it was usually a vanity issue. And I'd say, "You don't want to look old." And they say, "That's right. I don't want anyone to think I'm old." I say, "You know what makes you look really old?" They say, "What?" I said, "What makes you look really old?" They say, "What?" I said, "Exactly. What? That really makes you look old." I said, "Hearing is something we don't perceive externally. It's what you're dealing with. So if you're answering the question, we're not going to know that you're not hearing until, if you're wearing hearing aids, we're not going to see them. You're going to look younger actually because of that." They said, "Oh." Then I get them to go get a hearing test. And because we know that not only is it a cause, but we can increase people's cognition in the moment by improving their hearing. If I test people without and with their hearing aids, they do better, even on nonverbal tests, when they hear. I'm a huge fan of those. It also really makes for better relationships.
Yeah, definitely. We sometimes will refer to this brain that we've got in our head as maybe a muscle. I don't think that's the correct term, but sometimes I do wonder if there is this, if you don't use it, you might lose it, atrophy type thing. And one of the things we would go back and forth, I recall with my mom, they would have a certain news channel on most of the time. And I don't care which one it is, by the way, I'm not prone to it. And we would say, "Stop leaving the television going. It can't be good for the brain."
Mhm.
So is there any accuracy in that statement, or did we just want them to turn off the Fox, CNN, MSN? Again, I don't care which one it is channel because that can't be good for you. Any thoughts on that?
It's usually a default position. It's usually this fills the time, makes me feel like I'm interacting in some ways, and these people are my friends. And now, therefore, I can feel comfortable just sitting here all day looking at this and having this go on in the background, even though the same story is usually repeating itself every hour or two. It's really important to use the brain, even though there aren't any specific computer generated exercises or games that by themselves are known to prevent dementia. What we find is with most, and this is a field that's really in flux because there are some newer information that suggests maybe some games for some people may do something, but the rule has generally been, and the reason I'm not put in a therapist in my office to do brain games with people is that usually people who practice brain games get better at doing brain games. And that's not really what the purpose is. It's really to make your brain better. But your brain is not a muscle. It doesn't work by the same kind of rules that your biceps do, for example. But we do want people to be interactive. You say, what if I play these games on my computer? So if you enjoy playing them, sure. But that's not where you want to be limited. You certainly don't want to be in front of the TV all day. You really want to be interacting with other people. I don't care if you're playing cards or checkers or mahjong or pachisi. I don't care whether you're going to the senior center and playing pool or sitting around talking. It really doesn't matter, but I want an interpersonal element, and I want things to be stuff you have to solve or you have to think about, not just things that you have to repeat. So I'm trying to get people as active and interpersonally connected as we possibly can.
Which is odd in a culture where people are interacting some with the social media, AI, all the things we have, but I don't think it's showing our age that just some of that personal interaction, communications, and things like that is powerful. Mitch, is there anything I should have asked that I may have missed?
Well, there's tons we could talk about. I got nothing else going on in my life. I can come back some other time.
I'd love
But there's
that.
a lot of, I could talk about this all day long, literally. And that's why Emily and I get along so well, because we can both talk about it ad nauseum with each other. And I say to her, look, we're going out, we're going to meet these people. Pretend we don't do anything in this area. Let's talk about something else.
Yeah, maybe we could do another one where we really focus on leaders and leaders of organizations and what to happen as this starts to, I don't know, creep in, or to be mindful of it and things like that. I didn't even get into the situation that we identified with my dad with what he was doing with the financial aspect of things before it was identified. My sister had to step in and all that. There's so many things to this that spill over that leaders of organizations and all can have to deal with.
I definitely want to do that with you because that's a real focus for me, because if you can keep your leadership thinking better and working longer in that position rather than having to retire because they can't keep up with it, that's going to be a real advantage to that organization. I definitely think that's doable.
The powerful thing is, again, I just hit 60 and I'm recognizing, you know what, I can't do what I used to do physically. I'm in pretty good shape, fit. And mentally, I just don't try to put as much in here as I used to for capacity. But boy, we've got some wisdom and experiences that we need to keep sharp so we could share that. And so anyways, all right, Mitch, this is our call to action. What does someone need to do that has just listened to all of this? We've mentioned the assessment a few times. Let's drive them to that, give them all the info for that. And maybe if they need to connect with you and get the book, where can they get all of that info?
BrainDoc, BrainDoc.com. Real basic brain. We picked up this website, this name, 30 years ago. I got it when it was available and have kept it all this time. And it's as easy to remember. BrainDoc talks about, this is what we do. We're doctors. We deal with the brain. It's got a link to our book. It's got a link to our checklist that you can get. There's a bunch of other not as good podcasts on there, but they can listen to those as well. There's a couple articles that we've written or been written about us. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So that's the place. And also there's a way of connecting there's an email connection there as well.
Yeah, very good. We'll make sure we include all those notes down below and the places that you can go to find all that. Mitch, we are Seek, Go, Create. Those three words, and they mean a lot to us, but those three words, if I were to allow you to choose one that just meant more than the other two at this time, which word would you choose and why?
They're all tough because they're all great. I would choose seek. And this relates to me something I used to tell my postdoctoral residents. And at one point, I had 3 of them. And I said to them, you got to ask the next question. You got to be curious. I can't teach you to be curious, but if you're someone who seeks, if you're someone who is curious about how people tick or how you tick, if you're curious about what makes things work or not work, just answer questions, you're going to go a long way. So constantly be looking, what can I learn today? That makes it a great day. If you learn something new, that's a success.
Amen. Dr. Mitchell Clionsky, I so appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate you, and make sure you share this with your wife, Emily. I appreciate you guys putting the book together, Dementia Prevention. And I love the subtitle, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. So again, I did a quick read through. I'm actually going to go back and do a deeper read through it. In the last few days, I read it quickly just to get the gist of it. Excellent book. I believe it's a book that everyone should read just because of the general nature of the health and why we need that. And I just appreciate the conversation. I appreciate you listening in on this sort of a personal conversation that I've had for you, the listener, but I believe it's something that impacts probably almost everyone. So you've been able to listen in on me, ask some personal things, and I appreciate that. We have new episodes every Monday. Until next time, continue being all that you were created to be.